In this tutorial video, I'll be showing you how to draw a dog's nose using coloured pencils. Hi everyone, welcome to this tutorial in where I will be showing you how to draw a dog's nose using colour pencils. This is one of a series of videos which all tie together to create the bigger tutorial, which is how to draw the German Shepherd dog. It was basically focusing on black fur, but it's showing how to draw a German Shepherd dog using colour pencils on Pastelmat. It's all dry pencils as well, start to finish. So the full series of videos are broken down into how I make the paper choice, how to transfer the line drawing, drawing the eyes, creating the underpainting, creating fur texture, and here we are creating the nose. You'll see first of all I transferred my line image across using a stylus, an indenting tool. So I've actually pressed in my lines, made my marks, so now I can just rub my pencil over the top and that will make my initial lines and marks start to show through, and this works really well for that sort of highlight area of the texture, a little bobbly texture of the skin, the broken nose skin texture up over the top. So you could actually take your stylus, especially if you're working on white paper. Obviously here I'm using the burgundy Pastelmat, so if you were using the white Pastelmat here, you could use that indentation method to your benefit, especially on the area around the top of the nose where you've got texture and it's white texture showing through. So anyway, back to this nose. I'm starting off just using my black pencil, and you can see I'm using a mix of that little motion there where I'm doing the circular motion, and it's sort of a medium pressure, light to medium pressure, and it's small circular motion with my pencil. I am going backwards and forwards and obviously following the lines of my drawing as well, but mainly I'm using that little scumbling technique, and I'll do it anti-clockwise there, and I'll also rotate it back clockwise. There we go, we've just rotated it there. So it just means that I'm getting the pigment into the tooth of the paper and filling it nicely. Especially here, I'm trying to get my darkest values in first, and obviously the darkest values, if you look at the reference there, it's always in those nostrils. So once I've got that in, then I will start to pretty much, I call it glazing. It's just like laying a light layer of pencil, of pigment, over the whole area of the nose until we start to build it up to the depth of value that we want. There'll be a mix of, here obviously I'm going in with my black first of all, but there'll be a mix of my dark indigo in there, the Indanthrene blue, possibly a touch of the Prussian blue. We'll also have cinnamon in there in the reflections, some Caput Mortem, warm grey, cool grey, obviously white, but it'll all mix together and build. So you want sharp pencils here for doing the nose. You'll see here I'm just feeling my way around, and every time I pause I'm flicking my eyes backwards and forwards to the reference photo, and that is very important even if you're following one of my tutorials, that rather you can follow the techniques I'm showing you, but please make sure you've got your reference photo there also and you're following that reference. So there you go, I'm bringing in the Indanthrene blue now, just starting to glaze and place in some of that pigment up on the top left hand side of the nose. And you'll always see this in reflections, especially of noses and the eyes, that light from above, sometimes it'll be sky blue, but with this black dog, and especially a nice wet black nose of a dog, you will get lovely blues showing through. So you can see here I've sort of just gone in using that little circular motion. I've laid down one layer of pencil and I'm going in over the top, It's zoomed in quite a way so you can actually see the texture of that pastel matte. It's looking a little bit brown in the video, but it is in fact the burgundy purple colour. So now I've got my dark indigo, just going in with a point. I'm just wiggling, so I want to put the pigment down, but I don't want to glaze it over. I want to sort of, if you see the texture and the placement in the reference photo itself, I want to create that kind of effect, or start to create that kind of effect. So here, just using the dark indigo to glaze up over the top of that nose. Rather than just using the obvious black, I want to get a nice dark indigo undertone going through there. And when you pick up a colour, like I say, I've picked up a dark indigo, so I'm actually hunting on my reference photo of like, where else are there tinges of this dark indigo that need to go in? So I'm just searching my photo, and as soon as I spot it, down it goes onto the actual drawing. So we've got dark sepia coming in now, just around the edge of that nostril line. I'll go over it with a warm grey later on. I'm thinking ahead again, remember. So always think ahead. Your pastel matte is your mixing palette. So you want to be thinking ahead of what pencils do I need to put down, not only to create the values, so the darks and lights, but also which ones are going to mix together, fill the pigment, fill the tooth of the paper, and also blend together to give me the finished hue and value that I'm looking for. So by putting down some of this dark sepia, when I go in over the top with a warm grey, it's going to be a blend of the two props. And then so as the warm grey hits the dark indigo, it'll be a lovely warm lighter colour blue. Where it hits the dark sepia, it'll be a really warm warmish mid-grey, browny grey tone. So just think about it. And as also, if you bring in some Caput Mortem, which is a lovely warmish red burgundy, where those all mixed together, again, try it on a, I always try it out on a sample sheet. I know I'm terrible for trying out mixes on my paper, but I've got a few years of experience and many pieces under my belt now, so I'm pretty trustworthy of myself of, which ones what my result's going to be. But if you're just starting out, I do recommend, getting a sample sheet of paper on the side, and just takes a couple of minutes. If you're not sure, just try them out. Okay, so still using that scumbling motion, especially up over the front of that nose. And it's good as well just to go online and look at the anatomy of a dog's nose. Look really closely. I'll say I've already done the eye studies, but if you take the time to study the anatomy of your subjects as well, it really helps you understand. You're not just trying to draw what you think you can see, but you understand what is actually in the structure as well, rather than guessing, because you've got here with the dog, you've always got, there is technical terms, you've got this line that comes up here from the mouth. This comes straight up in through to the nose as well. Usually comes about halfway up the nose, almost to the top of the nostrils. That's called the philtrum. And then you've got the main nose pad itself across the top, and then you've got something called the alar fold, which is this fold of skin, because that's what it is up here. It's that wet skin. That's the alar fold, which curls into the actual nostril itself. But then this is actually called the nair, the external nairs, which is your nostril. So There are technical terms, and obviously this is what I call like a normal dog. This is Nougat now I've got going in over the top, which is a lovely warmish browny grey as well. But to say, understanding the anatomy of the dog really does help you then stop guessing at what you can see. But say this is what I call traditional dog's nose. You've also got flat-faced dogs, so you've got like boxers, pugs, bulldogs, which completely different looking structure. And then of course you go over to cats' noses and things as well that are all completely different. So just have a look at, just Google dog nose anatomy and it'll give you a good understanding of what the structure is rather than you trying to guess at what you're seeing. I say just, if you see dogs in the street, if you're allowed to say hello to them, bend down and have a good look. I mean, I'm lucky I've got 5 dogs. So I get to, I usually have the noses in my face from 6 a.m, usually with a ball in the mouth as well. So I do get to study my dog's noses quite a lot. But if you're not, if you don't have dogs, you're not frequently in contact with them, just use the internet to really have a look and get to understand. There's also the texture of the nose as well, the actual texture of the skin, and you can get obviously some older dogs might have a dry area up over that nose, which makes it look quite flaky. It's always nice to have a nice wet nose because it makes the dog look nice and healthy. So if it's something like a commission piece that you're doing, just speak to your client. If it's an older dog or his nose is looking a little bit like, a little bit scabby or flaky, and they want it depicted slightly differently, and more healthy, then that's where you can use artistic license and use, again, you can use sort of other reference from the internet of dogs' noses of a similar breed to create a slightly more aesthetically appealing feature for a commission portrait. So here you can see I've gone over all of that area where I had the dark sepia. Instead of going in straight away with warm grey, I'm working my way up. So as always, I work from my darks through my mid-tones and colours up to my lights. So I've gone in with my dark, so my black, that dark indigo, and then I've put in the dark sepia, and then we've gone over now with the nougat, which is starting to bring it up towards the warm grey. So literally just picking out, that's where the light's reflecting on that bottom edge up underneath the nose. And of course we've got the work to do around the muzzle as well, and that always helps. The muzzle area has not been worked much yet either. But it's just this dog was looking so strange that I decided at this point to get the nose in to really give me some definition. It looked strange that the mouth and the nose was missing at this point, so the underpainting was down for the main dog. But I needed to get that nose in place. So you see here how now we've got several shades of, okay, so that's the warm grey 2 going in there now, or the cool grey 2. Cool grey 2, no, warm grey 2. So we're just going in now. We've just started, we built up, as I said, we were going to work our way up to that warm grey. So we've gone in, and with each layer that goes down, more pigment goes into the tooth of that paper, and the actual texture starts to become softer rather than the graininess of the paper. You start to get a blend and mix of all that pigment building up. And you see here I'm still using that scumbling technique, just tiny little strokes. Looking at my reference photo, coming back and just popping in exactly where little areas need lightening. And again, if a little bit comes too light, we just go back in and knock it back or take it back out with one of our darker pencils. And again, we've got very definite areas here where we've got warm areas down over the front of the nose, the flat front, and very much cooler areas up on that top right, warmer up on the top left. It's just seeing where you've got the warm and the cool areas. Again, this bottom left of this flare of the nostril, the nair, that fold, you will need to bring some cinnamon in there as well, and possibly some light flesh. There you go, that's the light flesh going in just to soften the grey that I've popped in there, but there is actually cinnamon needed in there, and possibly some nougat as well. So again, this is a really good way, same as when you do the eye studies, of starting to look really closely. Yes, it's a black nose, but you don't go in there and just do a black nose with a couple of greys and then some whites for the highlight. It's all about looking for all those hidden colours and values. Your texture comes at the end. Like I say, you can actually build up towards that texture, but it's just colour blocking, exactly as like we do on the rest of the dog. We're looking for shapes, values, colours, and just putting them in where they belong. And as you take your time and build it up, that's when it all starts to come together. So going in here now with our cool grey 1. You go in with the white. White's a little bit harsher, but again, if you go in with cool grey 1 or a white, and then you can just take it back if you've taken it too light, you can pop it back in over the top with that dark sepia or your nougat to soften it, or your dark indigo, just to take back any of the highlights that you might have popped in a little bit too much of. And again, we'll bring this pretty much to completion, but we do allow ourselves then, when we've got the whole of the dog portrait pretty much in place, then we allow ourselves then the chance to go back in and work top to toe, and if we need to make any tweaks to the nose then as well, or any other areas of the dog, that's when we would do it. So we'll bring this nose in this tutorial pretty much to completion, as far as it goes for a dog's nose, but with regards to the whole portrait, we make that allowance that right at the end we do a top to toe, and any tweaks that are made, that's when we can make some final adjustments. So you see here, I'm just going along, mapping in. We've done all our darks and our mid-tones. We're just going in now and filling in all of those bright highlights. And where I add this pencil over the top of some of the colours, you can see it's mixing and blending there, bottom right of that nostril. It's mixing with the dark indigo and just becoming lovely light warmish blue through there. But again, we'll repeat that process, because if I still see the grain of the paper, I just go back in, take it back to dark, then work our way back up through dark indigo, dark sepia, our nougat, and our warm grey. So I'm just here going in and marking in some of that muzzle. By doing that, it then just creates the outline of our nose itself. So this is the white now going in over the top, just to really make some of those highlights pop a little bit. And of course we've zoomed in such a way with the camera, then this is going to look slightly grainier to the eye, because it's obviously much bigger than in reality. But when we zoom out again, that's when it all becomes apparent, and you won't be able to see that enlarged focus on the grain of the actual paper. This does really exaggerate it by zooming in with the camera. So I've got light flesh here, just lifting some of that area of the muzzle underneath the nose itself. And see if I've just taken it a tiny bit too light. I go back in and knock that back again. Just working around the outside of that nose, you can see it instantly just starts to bring the outline of that lower edge of that nostril and nose itself. It's almost like working in negative. So where we marked in some of our highlights, we're just cutting in around there now with our black. So like I said, if you happen to take your highlights or any of the lighter areas too light in places, you just go back in with your dark, and obviously you want to break it up anyway to create some of the texture. I call it bobbliness. It's not really bobbly because it's not raised bubbles of skin. It's sort of almost like scales of a fish on a dog's nose. So you can start to see now that must be on, I don't know how many layers we've already gone in on there now with, but you can start to see the front flat edge of this nose starting to build in depth and value now. You can also still see the undertone of that paper shining through, so you've got that undertone of the burgundy just shining through still, and again you can use that to your advantage if you like, or you can keep on building these layers to totally eliminate that. Even as I watch this, I can just picture myself, sort of my eyes, how I know how often they're like back to that reference, drawing, reference, drawing, reference, drawing, reference, drawing. I can just feel my eyes flicking backwards and forwards. Okay, so back in, that's with the Nougat again there now. You can see it's a lovely pencil to use. I use it a lot for my soft, warm highlights. It just blends beautifully. It creates it's almost like a real coffee mix over the top, especially over the greys and the blues. It blends beautifully. It's definitely one of my favourite pencils. Call it a softener. It's one of my softeners, a bit like my cinnamon. It's very much a softener when I use it on chestnut colour animals, brown animals. My Nougat is the same for my blacks and my greys. So I'm just glazing over now over this side with that dark indigo again. So really still need to build more on the depth of value of this front flat edge of the nose. Obviously the camera, the lighting that I use, the daylight lamp is lighting it, so it looks a lot lighter on screen than it does on the actual drawing. So I will pop in at the end an image of the scan of the finished nose, so you can see in reality what it was looking like, rather than here where I'm drawing and I'm using my daylight lamps to see by. It does give a lighter view for you guys on the screen than, like I say, on the actual drawing itself. But I need the daylight lamps to be able to see what I'm actually drawing. Okay, so I've got the warm grey again now. See how much gentler my touch is now? I'm literally picking out tiny little dots and areas where I just need to place odd bits of pigment now. Still using that little scumbling technique, even though it's much lighter pressure and much smaller areas that are being covered. Still I keep my pencil on the paper, and I'll increase or decrease the pressure as and where I need it. It's very, very tactile using pencils on the pastel mat. If you look there on that muzzle, you see just underneath where my pencil is, you see how grainy it is. So you can see how many more layers are going to be needed there to start to eliminate that grain. And I know that we're not actually working on the muzzle, but this does help just to have a frame for the actual nose to sit within. And that the lightness of the actual muzzle, lightness and colour of the muzzle, provides my outline for the nose itself. So my pressure now as I'm working around the bottom of that nose is really light. So if you've done your pressure test, my pressure there is probably a 2. So very, very, very light. But again, it's about touch and feel. So touch the pencil to the paper. If you know the pencil's touching the paper, you know that there's tooth in that paper. So just the fact that you can feel your pencil touching it means that there is leaving a residue of pigment down there. Even if you can't see it to the naked eye, it's going down. So just 2 or 3 little sweeps of the pencil will reveal the pigment building up there. So I just popped in a little touch of Prussian blue there. Just slightly more petrol-y turquoisey blue. I just put in a little hint of it. So I've got the dark sepia again now. It's just less harsh than the black or even the dark grey 5 or 6. So mix, like I say, of that dark sepia with your dark indigo up around that top edge first of all. You can add your black in with those just to darken up the value. And now even if you look at the reference photo of the nose, the top right hand side where the light is reflecting on it, it's too easy just to go straight in there with white all the way across over the top of that nose. You just got to think that it's still a highlight hitting a black nose, so you still need some depth underneath. Plus, of course, if you just go in with white or like a light grey, a cool grey 1 or 2 up over that nose, all of that grain and tooth of the paper is just instantly going to show itself, and it just will not blend out just by keeping building and building and building, white on white on white or light on light on light. You need to mix and still get some of those undertones in, even on that top edge. So just use the dark indigo there all the way around the bottom and left hand side of the muzzle. Going in now with the black over the top, so the black will blend with the dark indigo and the Indanthrene blue and touches from our initial underpainting there underneath. It'll all blend together. So it'll be a warmish, reddish, bluish black underneath that area. Again, I'm not too worried about texture at this point. It's still colour blocking, even if I'm just colour blocking in with more precision than I might have done on the previous layer. So I've got a mix of the light flesh now, and I'll bring in the cinnamon just for the reflection that's coming up and underneath the nostril, the nose. Anyway, like I say, where I've taken it slightly too light, I'm going back in my dark indigo and just cutting back into it there. Just looking really closely at the reference photo again now, just to make sure I'm getting that line where the nose meets the fur of the muzzle. Just making sure I'm getting that outline spot on there. I can't express enough to you how much this is all about lightness of pressure using those pencils. You can see I'm just repeating, you know, yes there is precision, but there's not real precision, it's just colouring in with those pencils back and forth, round and round. But it's just mixing all of the layers, working dark to light, back down to dark, back up to light. If you lose any of your colour anywhere, just pop it back in. If you lose any of your highlights, pop them back in. If you need to take an area slightly darker, take it darker. So I'm using a really light pressure here, just over the front edge of that nose again. Okay, so I'm going in now with my white. I'm just tackling, there was something not quite sitting right over on that right hand side, that outline shape, so I just want to try and get in some of these highlights now to really get my all of my shapes in the right place. You see that white mixing with that Indanthrene and Prussian blue underneath. How much it's lightening it up. Up over here, remember we've got dark sepia and dark indigo up over here as well, so those will mix together. I'll also use some greys up over on the top edge of that nostril. No, I keep saying nostril. Top edge of that nose as well. Whenever there's a pause like this, I'm probably just sharpening my pencils up. And that's one important thing, like I say, just make sure you keep sharpening your pencils because we need to be more precise now. It's quite a lightest pressure, but I just want to make sure I've got that outline marked into the right place. Still those small little circular motions, backwards and forwards, or tiny little circles. Pencil stays on the paper. If you lift the pencil and just keep going in and putting marks, it's going to start to create a texture that you don't want. We're initially trying to create smoothness and building the pigment. We're not trying to create texture. Where we've done some of that indentation right at the beginning, laying down our line drawing, that's initially going to have created some texture for us anyway. But we need to build this pigment to get rid of the tooth of that paper, remember. This is a prime example here where I rub this white pencil quite loosely over the top of this area. You can just instantly see that's that grainy toothiness right there on in the middle area, really showing up, and that's what we're eliminating by building up all of these light layers of pencil. I'll start to exaggerate some of these highlights now. And as I say, I take them nice and light, and then if they're too bright, we just come back in with our midtones or our darks, and we take them back out again, we cut back into them. It's quite mad that once you add the white or light grey, that's when the truth of what pencils you've put down underneath starts to shine through. So just switched out there from the white over to a cool grey. So there's a slight transition as it hits the top edge where it comes forward onto the flat front of the nose. Now I'm just putting in little wiggles, little dots of the grey, a bit like a broken line. So just enhance that outline by sinking the muzzle and the fur back, and then that'll pull the nose forward. I was just checking, I laid the pencil down there then, just checking the line, that top edge of that bright highlight, just to make sure I've got the angle of the dark shadow in correctly. Now I'll go in there quite boldly now with this white, just to make sure I've got the top edge of that nose going in at the right angle. Not at a right angle, at the correct angle. My eyes are super studying the reference photo before I just come in there and start to build again. Little scumbling motion with that white pencil, clockwise and anti-clockwise, just to make sure I'm getting the pigment into the tooth of that paper. Got distracted there by some of that, wanting to get some of that outlined fur from the cheek and the ear in the right place. It all helps because it's all about positioning and making sure that I've got all of my lines in position and everything's meeting up at the right angles. So even though that was a slight distraction, I needed to do that to know that everything within the space is all going in and meeting up proportion wise. So back in with that lovely new gun now, my lovely warming blender as I call him. Absolutely love it. It's so much warmer than just using a grey in there. So see, I went in there first of all with a warm grey. I've got the cool grey now. And it's just looking for the different values of those highlights. Here you can see some of the cool and the warm mixing together. You can still see as well, I've still got those indentation lines from the line drawing still shining through. So even after all these layers that are going down, and even with the sharp pencil, you can still see you've got your little guidelines there if you need them. If you went in and pressed too heavy though, early on, you would lose these lines. So if you just leave them in there for guidance, you can press them out really hard once you're confident enough that you don't need those little lines anymore. You just knock them back out by using a bit more pressure over that area. Like I'm doing now, it's like, right, okay, I've decided that area needs to go a tiny bit darker. I had my shape not quite right there, so I'm just blending it back out now with my dark indigo. You can see where confidence builds. Once the initial layers of the nose, I'm feeding my way around, making sure I'm getting the values in the right place, the touches of colour in the right place. And then as the confidence builds, I'm like, yep, I'm quite happy with that there, I'm quite happy with that there. Then we just move a little bit quicker, add a tiny bit more pressure. See here now, I've put that blue in over the top. I knocked out that line, our guiding line from the initial line drawing. Took it out, happy that everything's in place, and I'm just going in there now over the top of my shadows with my lights. Starting to build a lovely highlight across the top of that nose. Softening it out up into the top of the nose muzzle area. Pencil still staying on the paper, you see, backwards and forwards. And again, my pencil's really short here. I really should have stuck it into a pencil extender, but I was in the moment, I was enjoying doing the nose. I didn't want to stop and dig out my extenders and swap all my pencils over. So you see here, I start to use little wiggle marks. This is as technical as I get with it all. Little wiggle marks as I start to press and pop the pigment down now. Got a tiny touch of dark underneath, which will help to create the illusion of those outlines of the bubbles or the scales. Again, as I wiggle, slightly more pressure in some areas, and then I'll ease off, slightly less pressure, going back over the area several times, rather than just going in really heavy pressure once. It's lots of little wiggles, light pressure, pressing a tiny bit harder if needed, but going over the area more than once. I've switched out from the cool grey over to the white again now. The white just comes in to really emphasise some of those highlights. And again, I'll press it to the paper, give a little wiggle. If it doesn't leave the amount of pigment I want, and I just wiggle a tiny bit with a tiny bit more pressure. Some places I only want a tiny hint of that white blending and lifting, so I only use a very light pressure. And again, over here, I'm more than aware that if I brought any of that highlight down too thick or too wide over on the top right hand side, I'll go back over it with one of my darks or mid-tones just to soften it back as well. So obviously having a good sharpening session there. As you see, I wanted to come back in now, and where I literally where I just mentioned about if I've come down too wide or too thick with that white highlight there, I'll go back up into it with super sharp pencils. I've used my black there. I could also use use my dark indigo or the sepia. So now I've got the warm grey, really light pressure again now. Those little bubbles I was saying about, little scales of the skin, just going in really lightly, just tiny touches with this pencil to give the impression of that texture, literally just touching it to the paper and giving it a little wiggle. I'm just cutting around them now with my black. You'll notice I've left all of this video as real time as well. I haven't sped any of it up. So you can see literally how long this takes me to do. And I haven't even stopped it when I've been doing my pencil sharpening, which usually I'll stop it, so you can actually see real time start to finish on how I did this nose in reality in the studio. So I've got that cool grey now just on this edge, just again starting to build some of that hint of that texture of the nose. So it's all about the dark areas around these light highlights. So I'm just placing in little bubbles. They don't have to be exact, they just need to give the impression of the texture and look of the shine of that nose. It doesn't have to be exactly as you see it in the reference photo. It just has to create that same impression. See here how flitting between the warm grey, the cool grey, and then up to your white. Just see the depth of those layers of the highlights now. Transition. It's really starting to appear now. It obviously all comes together right near the end. We've still got another 10 or 12 minutes of this to go, but it is now starting to really come together. You'll notice me continually turning my pencil as well, and that helps to keep the point on the pencil. Just a little something. I've always done it anyway, it's just, and then Logic was telling me as I watched the video playback once, I could see myself doing it, and it's like, yep, that's because of the tooth of the paper and the grain of the paper. It just eats away at that edge that I'm pressing down there. So just by spinning the pencil, lift and spin the pencil, it just means it gives me a little bit more duration of that sharpened point edge. It's a bit like with pastel pencils, you can just rub them on to a tiny piece of sandpaper, and that's how you can keep the sharp point. It's sort of the same theory with this, but obviously it's not sandpaper, it's just textured paper, so it helps just by spinning the pencil that you turn it over and you've got a tiny bit more of an edge of a point there to work with. It means you're not sharpening literally every 2 or 3 strokes of the pencil. As far as colouring in goes, look, we've almost filled the whole space with pigment now, but you see there where we were just laying down some of those white little splodges and grey splodges and wiggles of the pencil, where because it was so dark underneath where we laid down our darks and our indigos and our sepia early on, just a little hint of a wiggle of one of the lighter colour pencils instantly gives the impression that we want. It's exactly the same when I say about working light fur texture over the top of, say, the ear or underneath an ear or a cheek. By having the dark intensity value of the shadow down first, it means then you can just use your lighter colour pencils to flick over the top, and it's just a few slight marks gives a really dramatic impression. So we've used our lights, we're just going back in now with a nice sharp and black. We're just cutting back into some of those light areas. See, I'm just sort of stippling the pencil quite loosely and quickly just to break up some of that highlight. Just going to refine it a tiny bit more. So I'm working all the way around now, just little tweaks with my super sharp black, cutting up through any of the light areas where it's too much or it just needs breaking up a little bit, softening. Really loving that reflection on the left hand side there, that bluey reflection. Like I say, once you see the scan at the end, you'll really see then how effective this is in real size rather than being this completely blown up zoomed in version for the camera. See here again, I've got the warm grey again. I'm just coming in down here now, wiggling in some of that pigment to create the impression of that scaly skin of the nose again. Very light pressure touches. Just cutting back through some of that highlight. Some tiny little touches again. Again, exactly as I was doing with the greys and the whites earlier, just going in and feeling my way around. The pressure is literally letting it touch the paper and then wiggling it and pressing a tiny little bit harder if it needed that extra hint. Just going back in here now. This is the Prussian blue I've just gone back in with there. Those tiny little touches have made such a difference. And here where I'm using the Polychromos, you could switch out and use a Pablo here if you want to really increase the intensity of that highlight on the right hand side. Remember, the white Polychromo is a little bit translucent, especially compared to something like the Pablo or the Luminance, or even a dry Albrecht-Dürer or Museum Aquarelle. They will give you a lovely white, bright white, cold white highlight. But this is all done in Polychromos here at the moment. I get this to a point where I'm very happy with the texture. Again, you can work it a tiny bit more when we do the top to toe. Mine doesn't match exactly the reference photo, but it is close enough that I'm happy with it. It gives me the effect of the wet, shiny nose, and it really does look striking on the full portrait. At this point of time, I still need to go in and do my last layers and create the texture of the muzzle. So I can't actually wait to see what it's going to be like when that is all finished. So just going back in again now with my black, just increasing any of those values a tiny bit more. Because if you look at the reference, see how dark inside of those nares, nostrils, how dark it is in there. And you can keep tweaking and keep tweaking this. In fact, the more time you've got to spend on it, the more I expect you to have it even more tweaked and more detail. Little touches of dark indigo going back in there again. So a tiny bit more pressure now, using on that white just to super increase those highlights around there. But I am more than happy now with how this is turning out. So we're coming to the end of this part of the tutorial series. If you've enjoyed watching the nose video on its own, then obviously, as I mentioned at the start, the rest of the German Shepherd tutorial, top to toe or top to neck chest, is available. There will be a full written downloadable tutorial as well that sits alongside the series, and also it will go into detail on the nose. So I'd like to say thank you very much for tuning in and watching. If you enjoyed the video, please give it a thumbs up. If you haven't already subscribed to my YouTube channel, please hit the little subscription button down in the right hand side. And if you would like access to all of my video tutorials that are not available to the public, please do join me over on my Patreon channel. Details are in the video description below. You'll get instant access to all of my downloadable tutorials and my videos. So thank you very much for watching, and hopefully I will see or hear from some of you again soon. Any questions, also please do pop them below, and I'll leave you in a second with a scan of the finished nose area, and that will give you a much better idea of the coloration and the values that were obtained, sort of true rather than with all my reflective drawing lights. So here you go, and thank you for watching.